The diner went silent the moment the thug's hand cracked across the wrinkled cheek of the 81-year-old black veteran. Plates rattled, a coffee cup spilled, and yet she didn't flinch. Her back stayed straight, her eyes steady, the quiet fire of a soldier who had faced worse in her youth. No one knew who she was. No one knew the battles she had already fought. But an hour later, the glass doors swung open, and her daughter walked in, flanked by the roaring leather-clad army of the Hells Angels, ready to show the world that no one lays a hand on a warrior and walks away untouched. My beautiful family and friends, welcome back. If you're ready for another unforgettable story, do me a quick favor, hit that like button. Why? Because each like tells YouTube, this story is worth sharing with more people who might really need it today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I do read every single one, and it makes me feel like we're sitting together in the same room, sharing these moments heart to heart. And don't forget to share this video with someone you love. You never know, the story you share might be the encouragement they've been praying for. This isn't just a channel, it's a family. And when you engage, you're helping us build a safe space where real stories bring real hope. Eleanor Jameson moved slowly, her cane clicking against the cracked pavement as she made her way toward Darla's Diner, a modest roadside spot where she often spent her mornings. At 81, every step carried the weight of decades, some filled with hardship, others with triumph, but her spine remained impossibly straight, her eyes alert. Her military training had been etched into her bones long ago, and though her body had grown fragile, her spirit was iron. The diner door jingled as she entered, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filling the air. Locals knew her, though few really saw her. To most, she was just Miss Eleanor, the elderly widow who lived in the tiny house near the tracks. They didn't know about her time in uniform, about the jungles of Vietnam where she had patched up young men barely out of high school, about the medals tucked away in a shoebox in her closet. They didn't know about the nights she sat alone, reliving the battles that had shaped her youth. She always chose the same booth, near the window, where sunlight warmed her hands. The waitress, Carla, greeted her with a weary smile. "Morning, Miss Eleanor." "The usual." "Yes, child," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, low, carrying an authority that made even the busiest waitress slow down. "Black coffee, 2 eggs, wheat toast. Nothing fancy." Her pension barely stretched far enough for the basics, but she insisted on paying for her breakfast every morning. It wasn't about the food, it was about the dignity of sitting among others, not being forgotten. She carried herself with quiet pride, and even when loneliness pressed heavy on her shoulders, she never complained. As she sipped her coffee, she watched the room. Construction workers, truck drivers, a pair of high school kids skipping class, ordinary faces in an ordinary place. She had learned long ago that dignity isn't proven on battlefields alone. Sometimes it's in how you hold yourself when the world has already moved past you. But not everyone respected that. The diner door swung open with a metallic creak, and in strode a man who carried trouble like a shadow. Mid-30s, leather jacket, tattoos creeping up his neck, a swagger that demanded attention. He scanned the room like he owned it, then dropped himself into the booth across from Eleanor without asking. She didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at him. "What are you staring at, old lady?" he sneered, leaning closer. The smell of beer clung to him despite the early hour. Eleanor set her cup down slowly. Her hand trembled, not with fear, but with age. "I wasn't staring," she said softly. "But I am wondering what kind of man barges in without manners." A ripple of laughter stirred among the booths, but the man's face twisted with anger. He wasn't used to being challenged. least of all by someone he saw as fragile, disposable. His hand moved fast, too fast for anyone to stop, and it struck her cheek with a sharp, echoing crack. The diner froze. Forks hung in midair. Carla gasped, her tray rattling in her hands. Eleanor didn't cry out. She didn't cower. She lifted her chin, eyes locked on him with the steel of a soldier who had once held the line under fire. The room had changed. She was no longer invisible. People saw her now, though none yet understood who she truly was. The thug smirked, muttering something under his breath, and stormed toward the counter. The air was thick with shock, shame, and silence. And yet Eleanor, her cheek already swelling, simply lifted her coffee cup again. She did not lash out. She did not collapse. She carried herself with the same unshakable dignity that had carried her through war, through loss, through life. What she didn't know was that this quiet moment, this refusal to break, was about to ripple farther than she could imagine. Because 1 hour later, the diner doors would swing open again. And the world would remember that Eleanor Jameson was never just an old woman, she was a warrior. How often do we walk past people like Eleanor, elders whose quiet strength and hidden sacrifices go unseen? What would happen if we chose to see the battles they've already fought, instead of dismissing them as fragile? The sting from the slap had begun to fade, but the silence it left behind clung to the air like smoke. Every eye in Darla's diner had fixed on Eleanor, waiting for her to crumble. The man at the counter leaned arrogantly, ordering a burger as though nothing had happened. His voice was loud, brash, meant to reclaim the attention that Eleanor had silently taken from him. Eleanor dabbed her cheek with her napkin. The paper came away faintly red. Carla, her voice trembling, hurried over. "Miss Eleanor, do you want me to call someone? The police?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, child. Don't you waste your time on that." "But, he hit you. That's assault." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I've seen worse. And I've learned this. Anger only breeds more anger. I won't give him that power over me." Her words, spoken with calm conviction, rippled through the room. Some of the patrons looked down, ashamed they hadn't intervened. Others exchanged glances, unsure what to make of her strength. But Eleanor wasn't trying to make a statement. She was simply being herself, guided by a lifetime of discipline and a refusal to surrender to hatred. The thug glanced back, smirking when he saw her sitting tall. "What? You're just gonna sit there? Thought so." He barked a laugh, shoving his food into his mouth with greasy fingers. Eleanor looked at him, her gaze steady, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned her attention to the waitress, to the young busboy clearing tables, even to the nervous high school kids in the back booth. She smiled at them, a small gesture to let them know she was unbroken. And then she did something no one expected. She stood, cane tapping the floor, and slowly made her way to the counter. The room held its breath. The thug leaned back, puffing up his chest as though ready for another confrontation. But Eleanor didn't raise her voice, didn't throw an insult, didn't spit back his hatred. She simply placed a $10 bill on the counter. "That should cover his meal," she said, her voice calm but carrying through the diner. "And maybe one day, he'll learn what it means to be a man." The room erupted in murmurs. The thug froze, his smirk faltering. He had expected fear, maybe retaliation, but not this. Not kindness. Not dignity. Carla stared in disbelief. "Miss Eleanor, you don't have to." "I know," Eleanor interrupted gently. "But I want to. He may not deserve kindness, but that doesn't mean I'll stop offering it. I won't let him take away who I am." Her act was small in motion, but immense in meaning. It wasn't about money. She didn't have much to give. It was about proving that her character would not be dictated by cruelty. She would not meet violence with violence. She would meet it with grace. The thug shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath. He grabbed his food, tossed a crumpled dollar onto the counter, and stormed out into the sunlight. For a long moment, the diner was silent again. And then, applause. Soft at first, from a man in the corner, then stronger as others joined in. Not the raucous clapping of a crowd at a concert, but the heartfelt recognition of people who had just witnessed something profound. Eleanor, however, only inclined her head and returned to her booth. She didn't revel in the attention. She didn't smile smugly. She simply finished her coffee as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Because to her, this wasn't extraordinary. This was life, choosing again and again to live with dignity no matter the circumstances. But what Eleanor didn't know was that someone outside had been watching. Parked across the street, a line of motorcycles gleamed beneath the sun. Their engines had been silenced, but the riders leaned against them, eyes sharp, jaws tight. They had seen the slap through the diner window. They had seen Eleanor stand tall. They had seen her pay for the meal of the man who struck her. And among them was her daughter, Layla. Layla hadn't entered yet. She'd been delayed, talking to a friend by the bikes. But she had seen enough to feel her blood boil. Her mother had endured war, loss, and a lifetime of struggle, and still the world found ways to test her. Layla's fists clenched, but then she looked at her mother, calm, dignified, unshaken, and she felt both fury and awe. Layla turned to the riders beside her, their leather vests marked with the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels. These were men and women feared by many, misunderstood by most. But to Layla, they were family, the only ones who had shown up when times were hard, when the world turned its back. "Wait," Layla whispered, holding them back from storming in. "Watch her. Just watch her." Inside, Eleanor had returned to her toast, as though she hadn't just changed the entire atmosphere of the diner. She was unaware that eyes were on her from the street. She was unaware that her quiet act of kindness had struck deeper than fists ever could. Carla refilled her cup, tears in her eyes. "Miss Eleanor, you're something else." Eleanor patted her hand gently. "No, darling. I'm just old enough to know that hate never feeds you. But kindness will keep you alive." And with that, the act was complete. She hadn't done it for recognition. She hadn't done it to shame the man. She had done it because it was who she was. A soldier. A mother. A woman who had seen too much of life to believe cruelty was the answer. An hour later, the diner doors would swing wide, and her daughter would enter, not alone but flanked by the rumble of loyalty and fire. But none of that would matter as much as what had already happened. An old woman had chosen kindness when the world offered her every excuse not to. Would you have done what Eleanor did, responding to cruelty with dignity and kindness? Or would anger have spoken louder? What does her choice make you reconsider about the way you handle disrespect? Eleanor left the diner the same way she had entered, slowly, cane tapping against the sidewalk, chin lifted high. Her cheeks still throbbed, and she knew it would bruise, but she wore it like a badge of survival. She didn't glance back at the stunned patrons or the waitress who had watched her walk out with misty eyes. To Eleanor, the incident was over. She had made her choice, and that was enough. The morning sun was rising higher now, spilling light across the quiet street. She adjusted her shawl, tucked her purse tighter under her arm, and continued toward the small house she had lived in for 40 years. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, peeling paint, a fence in need of repair, but it was hers. Paid off, brick by brick, with decades of hard work alongside her late husband. Inside, the house felt both comforting and lonely. The ticking clock on the mantel filled the silence. Photographs lined the walls, her husband in uniform, her daughter Layla as a child clutching a baseball glove, a younger version of herself standing tall in fatigues with medals pinned to her chest. She paused at that photo, her fingertips brushing the frame. Time had weathered her body, but her spirit was the same as the woman in that picture, a fighter, even when the fight wasn't fair. Her pantry was nearly bare, and her electric bill sat unopened on the kitchen table. Money was tight, but Eleanor never let worry consume her. She had learned in combat that fear solved nothing. She made a simple lunch, half a sandwich, a cup of tea, and sat by the window, gazing at the world outside. To her, it was just another day. To the world, though, whispers were beginning to spread. At Darla's diner, conversations buzzed long after Eleanor had left. Some customers expressed shame for not standing up. Others marveled at her strength. Carla couldn't shake the image of Eleanor sliding the $10 bill across the counter, her quiet words echoing in her ears. "He may not deserve kindness, but that doesn't mean I'll stop offering it." Word reached beyond the diner, carried by the mouths of those who had witnessed it. In a town where news traveled faster than the wind, Eleanor's story began to take root. And outside the diner that morning, Layla and the Hells Angels had watched her every move. Layla sat astride her motorcycle, helmet resting on her knee, anger simmering in her chest. Her brothers and sisters in leather looked to her for a signal, ready to storm the diner, but she had stopped them. "My mom doesn't need us to fight her battles," she had told them. "She's already won." But still, the sight of her mother walking home alone, face swollen from a stranger's cruelty, cut deep. The riders murmured among themselves, many of them hardened by rough lives, yet visibly shaken by Eleanor's dignity. They had seen strength before, but not like this, not in someone who looked like the world should have broken her long ago. That night, Eleanor sat in her armchair, the lamp casting a soft glow over her Bible, which lay open on her lap. She wasn't particularly religious anymore. War had made her question many things, but the familiar pages comforted her. She read a passage on turning the other cheek, and though the irony wasn't lost on her, she smiled. Sometimes scripture and life walked hand in hand. A knock at the door startled her. She rose slowly, gripping her cane, and opened it to find Layla standing there, leather jacket zipped up, eyes burning with a mix of fury and pride. "Ma," Layla said softly, stepping inside without waiting. "I saw what happened." Eleanor closed the door. "I figured you might have. Your friends were across the street." "They wanted to go in," Layla admitted. "We all did. But then you went and paid for that man's food. You just... Ma, how do you do that? How do you stay so calm when people treat you like nothing?" Eleanor eased back into her chair, motioning for her daughter to sit. "Because, baby, I know who I am. I don't need anyone else to tell me. And if I let hate change me, then I've already lost." Layla swallowed hard, her jaw tight. "You're stronger than anyone I know. But I swear, Ma, nobody's ever gonna put their hands on you again. Not while I'm around." Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "Strength isn't always in fighting, Layla. Sometimes it's in walking away." But Layla's mind was already turning. Her mother might not seek retribution, But Layla had grown up in a world where loyalty meant action. The angels had her back, and she wasn't about to let this moment pass quietly. The next morning, Eleanor rose early again, her routine unchanged. She swept her front steps, watered the withering flowers in her garden, and waved at the mailman as he passed. To her, life went on. She didn't dwell on the diner incident, didn't replay it in her mind. She had faced bigger battles and survived. This, to her, was just another test of character. But to the people around her, something had shifted. Carla visited after her shift, bringing groceries she claimed were extras. The high school kids from the diner left a note on her doorstep, scrawled in messy handwriting, "You're the bravest person we've ever seen." Even the construction worker who'd sat 2 booths down slipped an envelope under her door with $20 inside and a simple message, "Respect." Eleanor never asked for any of it. She simply accepted each gesture with quiet gratitude, never letting her pride stand in the way of kindness. Meanwhile, Layla and the Hells Angels were moving in silence. They began asking around town about the thug, learning his name, his habits, his haunts. Not to punish him with fists, though some of them sorely wanted to, but to ensure he knew exactly whose mother he had laid hands on. Word would spread, and when it did, Eleanor's dignity would shine brighter than any bruise on her cheek. For Eleanor, life remained simple: mornings at the diner, afternoons in her garden, evenings with her Bible. But beneath the surface, her quiet act of kindness had set wheels in motion she couldn't yet see. And while she remained unaware, her community, her daughter, and even strangers were beginning to see her not as just another old woman, but as a living reminder of what true strength looked like. How many of us, like Eleanor, keep walking after life's blows without realizing how many people are quietly watching, learning from our example? What ripples are your actions sending out today that you may never see? The diner had fallen into an uneasy hush. The air smelled of burnt bacon and spilled coffee, but beneath it hung something heavier: shame. A few of the customers shifted in their booths, murmuring to one another, stealing glances at the old woman seated by the window. Some looked away quickly, unable to hold her gaze. Others kept staring, their guilt plain but their courage absent. Evelyn dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. The slap had left a faint red mark, but she held herself as though it hadn't happened at all. Her hands didn't shake. Her jaw didn't tremble. She lifted her cup and sipped her lukewarm coffee as though nothing had transpired, as though she had lived long enough to know that the true strength of a warrior was in restraint. The thug, still smirking near the counter, muttered something to his buddies that drew a few hollow laughs. Their bravado was loud, but their eyes darted toward the woman every so often. There was something unsettling about how calm she remained. It was then that a young waitress, barely in her 20s, approached Evelyn's table. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a fresh cup of coffee, steam rising from the rim. "This one's on me," she said softly. Evelyn looked up, studying her. The girl's name tag read Lila. Her pale face flushed as she tried to smile. I'm sorry. Nobody should've." Evelyn raised a hand, silencing her without words. "Child," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, "don't be sorry for what others lack the backbone to stop. Just make sure you never grow into someone who watches and does nothing." Lila's throat tightened. She nodded, blinking back sudden tears. From the booth across the aisle, an elderly white man with suspenders pushed himself to his feet. His knees cracked as he rose, and his wife clutched at his sleeve as though to pull him back down. But he shook her off gently and shuffled over to Evelyn's table. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly, "I was in Korea." 1952. You don't look like someone who's seen her last fight. Evelyn's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. And you don't look like someone who ran from one. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrinkled $10 bill. He placed it on the table. Let me cover your breakfast. Least I can do. Evelyn looked at the bill, then back at him. Keep your money, she said gently. Your respect is worth more. By now, the shame in the diner had begun to shift into something else. A few patrons murmured their agreement. Someone clapped softly, then louder, until a ripple of applause echoed through the small diner. It wasn't for Evelyn's pain, but for her composure, for the way she held her dignity higher than any blow meant to strip it from her. The thug sneered at the sound, but even he seemed unsettled now. His swagger looked forced, his laugh brittle. He muttered to his buddies and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes, clearly looking for a reason to leave. Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice cutting clean through the noise. It's easy to hurt someone weaker than you, she said, her eyes on the thug. But it takes real strength to protect. Someday, life will test which side you belong to. The words hung in the air like scripture. Lila swallowed hard, then straightened her back as though Evelyn's words had stitched steel into her spine. The old man wiped at his eyes, nodding silently. The applause faded, but the energy remained, thick and palpable, something unspoken that bound the room together. And yet, Evelyn sat calm, sipping her coffee. She didn't bask in their support. She didn't need their validation. She had already won the moment by refusing to be broken. But none of them, not the waitress, not the old man, not the cowardly thug, could have imagined what was coming next, when the door would open again, and the rumble of engines outside would announce that Evelyn wasn't as alone as she seemed. The diner's cheap clock ticked toward noon, its second hand scratching the silence that followed Evelyn's quiet command of the room. The old woman's calm had shifted the atmosphere, but the thug still lingered, puffing his cigarette with exaggerated drags like he was daring anyone to challenge him. His buddies had grown restless, their bravado dimming now that the applause had died down, but none had the guts to drag him out. Then, faint at first, came the sound. A low, steady rumble, distant but unmistakable. Engines. Not cars, bikes. The sound grew, layering on itself, a chorus of horsepower that made the diner's window panes quiver. Conversation stilled, forks froze mid-air, and even the thug cocked his head toward the glass. Lila whispered under her breath, "What on earth?" The rumble grew into a roar. One engine became 5. 5 became 10. The ground itself seemed to vibrate beneath the small diner as the unmistakable thunder of Harley-Davidsons filled the street outside. Customers leaned over in their booths, craning their necks toward the front windows. The thug's smirk faltered, just slightly, and then the door opened. The bell jingled softly, absurdly small against the thunder outside. In stepped a woman, tall, leather jacket creaking, dark braids tucked beneath a black helmet she carried under her arm. Her eyes swept the room with practiced precision, sharp as a hawk's. Her boots struck the floor with confidence, each step a declaration that she feared nothing and no one. "Mom," she said. The word cut clean through the diner like a blade. Every head snapped toward Evelyn, who, at last, allowed herself the smallest, proudest smile. The thug blinked. "Wait, that's your kid?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to. The answer was already outside. Behind her daughter, the door swung open again. And again. The roar of engines stopped as men and women in leather jackets filed in, one after another, their vests patched with a name that made the thug's cigarette ash tumble into his lap. Hell's Angels. The bikers filled the diner like a storm cloud, not loud, not boisterous, just present. Their silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. The waitress Lila's jaw dropped. The old Korean War veteran gripped the edge of the booth, eyes wide with recognition. The thug's bravado cracked. He stammered, look, this ain't necessary." His buddies slid toward the exit, suddenly very interested in leaving their half-finished meals behind. Evelyn's daughter, standing tall in the center of it all, turned toward the thug. Her eyes, dark and blazing, locked on him. "Which one of you laid hands on my mother?" Silence. The thug swallowed. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. His hand trembled as he tried to stub out his cigarette on the counter. It wasn't like that. She was mouthing off. He never finished. One of the bikers, a mountain of a man with tattoos crawling up his neck, stepped forward and slammed his fist into the counter so hard the plates rattled. "Answer the question." The thug flinched. Sweat formed at his brow. His bravado had shriveled, leaving behind only fear. His buddies were gone now, having slipped outside into the sunlight where engines still idled like growling beasts waiting for command. Evelyn's daughter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You made the mistake of thinking my mother was alone. She never is." The thug backed toward the wall, hands raised. "I swear I didn't know." "You didn't need to know." Her voice was steel. "She's 81 years old. A veteran. A woman who's lived more life than you can imagine. And you thought you could slap her." The thug's lips trembled. He looked around desperately, but the room had no exits left for him, not really. Every booth, every stool, every patch of tile was filled with eyes that condemned him, not just from the bikers, but from the customers who had once looked away. Evelyn set down her coffee cup at last. The sound was soft, but somehow it carried. She looked at her daughter with quiet pride, then turned her eyes back to the thug. "I told you," she said evenly, "life would test which side you belong to. Today you found your answer." The thug swallowed, his chest rising and falling fast, like a trapped animal. Outside, more engines roared, as if the entire block had been swallowed by the presence of the Hell's Angels. The thug's knees buckled slightly, and his back pressed against the wall. "Please," he muttered. I didn't mean." But apologies meant nothing now. The twist had revealed itself. The frail old woman wasn't just a forgotten veteran. She was family to someone with an army at her back. And the coward who had thought himself powerful had just learned what real power looked like. The diner was no longer a place of silence and shame. It had become a courtroom, and the verdict was about to be delivered. The diner was thick with tension. The smell of grease and coffee hung in the air, but it was drowned out by the raw electricity of the moment. The thug pressed himself against the wall, cornered, while Evelyn's daughter stood tall, leather jacket creaking as she folded her arms across her chest. The patch on her back glared like fire, Hell's Angels. Every booth was filled with eyes watching, waiting. The air conditioner hummed nervously overhead, spitting out cool air that no one noticed. "You thought she was alone," her daughter said, voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Tell me, did it make you feel strong? To strike a woman old enough to be your grandmother?" The thug's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. One of the angels stepped closer, a tall woman with a scar across her cheek and heavy rings on her fingers. She cracked her knuckles slowly, deliberately. "Answer her." The thug raised his hands. I wasn't thinking. It was a mistake. I didn't mean nothing by it. You meant everything by it, Evelyn finally spoke from her booth, her voice steady. She hadn't moved since her daughter entered, still sitting with her coffee cup like a queen presiding over judgment. Weak men always mean it. They just regret it once someone stronger appears. The words landed like blows. A murmur of agreement rippled through the angels, their leather jackets shifting as they squared their shoulders, making the room feel even smaller, even more suffocating for the coward pressed against the wall. The thug's voice cracked. Look, I'll leave. I'll never come back. I swear. Evelyn's daughter tilted her head. Oh, you'll leave. But not like this. She glanced toward the scarred angel. He lays hands on my mother, and he thinks he walks out without consequence. The scarred woman smiled coldly. Not today. The thug's knees gave out. He slumped onto the sticky diner floor, his hands shaking. Please. I didn't know who she was. I didn't. That's your problem, the daughter snapped. You think respect is earned by knowing someone's title or patch. You think decency is optional. My mother shouldn't have to wear a uniform or a badge for you to treat her like a human being. The thug had no reply. His breath came in ragged gasps. The old Korean War veteran who had spoken earlier rose shakily to his feet. His wife tugged at his sleeve, but he brushed her off. Son, he rasped, pointing a trembling finger at the thug, you better thank God these bikers walked in instead of the police. Because one thing I know, out there where I've been, cowards like you don't last long. The customers murmured again, louder this time. Lila, the young waitress, stepped forward. Her voice shook, but she found her courage. He doesn't belong here. Not in this diner. Not in this town. We let people like him get away with things, and it just keeps happening. The thug looked around wildly, searching for sympathy, but there was none. Not from the bikers, not from the diners, not even from his own so-called friends who had bolted at the first sign of trouble. Evelyn's daughter crouched down so her eyes met his. Her gaze was merciless, sharp enough to cut glass. You're going to apologize to her. Properly. And then you're going to walk out that door, past my family, past everyone you tried to intimidate. And if you so much as think of raising your hand to another person like that again. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. We'll find you. The thug's eyes widened. He nodded frantically. Yes. Yes, ma'am. I swear. Say it, she ordered. The thug turned, trembling, to Evelyn. His voice cracked like a teenager's. I'm sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have touched you. Evelyn studied him for a long, quiet moment. Her eyes were unflinching, heavy with the weight of a lifetime. You'll be sorry the rest of your life, she said at last. But maybe, if you're lucky, you'll learn something from it. The thug looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Now, Evelyn's daughter said, standing tall again, get out. The thug scrambled to his feet. His legs wobbled, but adrenaline carried him toward the door. He fumbled with the handle, practically throwing himself outside into the blinding sunlight. The roar of motorcycles waiting for him outside made him freeze, but the angels parted just enough to let him pass, their eyes following him like predators watching prey scurry away. The diner erupted in whispers, the tension spilling out at last. Plates clinked again, voices rose, but the energy had changed entirely. No longer shameful silence. This was catharsis. Evelyn sat back in her booth, lifting her coffee cup again as if nothing had happened. Her daughter slid into the seat across from her. For the first time that day, Evelyn let her lips curl into a smile. "Took you long enough," she teased. Her daughter chuckled, shaking her head. "Traffic." The two women shared a look, one of deep respect, unshakable love, and the kind of bond forged only through trial survived. But outside, the engine still rumbled. The confrontation wasn't just about a single thug anymore. It was about something bigger. A statement. A reminder. The Angels weren't just a motorcycle club that day. They were a message. And that message was about to echo far beyond the walls of the diner. The door swung shut behind the thug, and for the first time in nearly an hour, the diner felt like it could breathe again. The tension that had coiled through every corner of the small space loosened, replaced by a strange kind of stillness, like the quiet after a storm when the world is still deciding what comes next. Outside, the growl of motorcycles faded as the Hells Angels idled, their presence a living wall of protection. Inside, though, every eye turned to Evelyn. The old veteran leaned against his booth, one hand on his chest. "Ma'am," he croaked, his voice thick with emotion, "I've seen courage before, but nothing like the way you sat there. Didn't flinch. Didn't back down. Reminded me of why we fight in the first place." His words brought a hush again, but this one was reverent, not fearful. Lila, the young waitress, wiped at her cheeks with the corner of her apron. "He was bigger than you, meaner than you, but he still walked away looking smaller. You didn't even need the Angels." Evelyn chuckled softly, setting her cup down. "Don't be fooled, sweetheart. Everyone needs backup. I just happen to have a daughter who knows how to ride." Her daughter grinned but stayed quiet, her eyes still locked on her mother, almost studying her as though trying to memorize this moment. The diner's manager, a balding man with glasses who had hidden in the kitchen during most of the confrontation, finally emerged, wringing his hands. Mrs. Harris," he stammered, "I should have stepped in. I should have done something. Instead his voice faltered. Instead, I let fear tell me what to do." Evelyn's gaze softened, though her tone stayed steady. "Fear talks to all of us. But courage? Courage answers. That's the difference." The words landed heavily, not just for him, but for every customer in the room. Heads nodded slowly. The hush was no longer shame, it was awakening. For decades, Evelyn had carried the lessons of her service, that battles aren't always fought on foreign soil, that wars aren't always against enemies with uniforms and flags. Sometimes the battleground was as small as a diner booth, and the war was against indifference, cowardice, and silence. And in this little diner, she had just won another victory. Her daughter finally leaned in, resting her elbows on the table. "Ma, you don't even realize what you did, do you? That man thought he could take your dignity with one slap. But you sat there and showed him, and everyone watching, that dignity doesn't belong to anyone else. It belongs to you." The scarred angel who had nearly stepped in earlier walked over. She rested a heavy hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Respect," she said simply. Then louder for everyone to hear, "This woman's tougher than any of us in this room. Don't forget her face." A chorus of agreement followed, rough voices from leather-clad men and women who weren't used to handing out compliments. Yet here they were, tipping their heads, their respect clear. Lila stepped closer again, her voice steadier this time. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn looked at her, waiting. What makes someone hold steady like that? I mean, I froze when he hit you. I wanted to do something, but I couldn't move. How did you not break? Evelyn leaned back, her eyes narrowing slightly as though the question had pulled her into another lifetime. Discipline, she said finally. In the service, we learn to stand even when everything in you screams to fall. Sometimes you win by fighting back. Sometimes you win by refusing to give them the power of a reaction. You just have to know which kind of strength the moment is asking for. The girl nodded slowly, her jaw tight with determination. Something had lit behind her eyes, something Evelyn recognized. The spark of courage being born. It was then that Evelyn's daughter turned toward the crowd. I hope you all understand something. My mother didn't ask for this fight. None of us ask for these moments. But when they come, you don't get to stay silent. Not anymore. Her voice was like thunder rolling through the diner. Next time you see someone try to humiliate, to harm, to bully, remember what you saw here today. Remember her. A murmur of agreement rippled through the diner. People straightened in their seats. Some clapped quietly. Others bowed their heads in thought. The weight of responsibility was shifting, settling on each person there. For Evelyn, it wasn't about applause. It never had been. She reached across the table and touched her daughter's hand. Enough lecturing, child. Let's finish this breakfast before the eggs get cold. Laughter broke the tension at last. It wasn't loud, but it was real. People exhaled, some smiling, some still blinking back tears. The fear that had paralyzed them earlier had transformed into something else, resolve. Outside, the angels remained stationed, their engines idling like a heartbeat. But inside, Evelyn had done more than stand her ground. She had reminded every soul present of what true strength looked like. This was no longer just about her. It was about all of them. About a town that had seen cowardice in broad daylight and learned what courage looked like in response. And though Evelyn would never admit it, this was the turning point. Not just in the diner, not just for the thug who fled, but for the community itself. From that morning forward, they would never forget the sight of an 81-year-old black veteran sitting with her coffee, unmoved by violence, teaching them all that the quietest form of courage can sometimes roar the loudest. The diner had quieted again, but this time it was a warm quiet, the kind that comes after truth is spoken aloud. Coffee cups clinked softly. People whispered to one another, not out of shame, but awe. Evelyn sat like she always had, back straight, eyes calm, sipping her coffee as though she hadn't just changed the entire air of the room. Her daughter leaned back in the booth, studying her. You know, she said softly, you've been teaching people lessons your whole life. The army, the neighborhood, us kids, and you're still at it. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. Teaching doesn't stop when the uniform comes off. The scarred angel shifted beside them, her arms folded. Your mom's tougher than anyone I've ridden with. No disrespect to the club, but I've never seen anyone hold a room the way she just did. Evelyn chuckled lightly. Toughness isn't about muscle or scars. It's about spirit. And spirit doesn't age. The words seemed to sink into everyone within earshot. A young man in a booth by the window whispered to his girlfriend, I wish my grandma was like her. It was then that Evelyn's daughter spoke louder, her tone shifting from playful to reverent. Maybe it's time they knew who she really is. The diners leaned in, curiosity sparked. Even the bikers, who already knew part of the story, turned their eyes toward Evelyn. Evelyn frowned slightly. Now, don't you go turning me into some kind of legend. Too late, her daughter said. You already are. And then she stood, addressing the room. You're all sitting here looking at her like she's just someone's grandmother. But do you know who you're sharing breakfast with? The hush was immediate. Forks paused in midair. Even the hum of the neon signs felt quieter. This woman, her daughter continued, is Sergeant Evelyn Harris. Vietnam War veteran. Combat medic. Bronze Star. 2 Purple Hearts. She patched up men who thought they wouldn't live to see another sunrise. She dragged wounded soldiers out of firefights under enemy fire. And she came home, not to parades or thanks, but to silence. To doors closed in her face. To jobs that wouldn't hire her. To neighbors who didn't want to hear her story because she was a black woman in a uniform they pretended to respect. Gasps rippled through the diner. Lila clutched her apron. The old Korean veteran saluted without hesitation, his hand trembling but steady enough to hold. She gave this country her youth, her blood, and her strength, the daughter pressed on, her voice breaking with emotion. And yet, she still comes here every week, sits in that booth, and treats everyone around her with more dignity than she's ever been given. Evelyn's eyes watered, though she blinked quickly, trying to disguise it. That's enough, child, she muttered. But her daughter wasn't done. And today? Some punk thought he could take from her what no battlefield ever could. But he failed, because you can't strip away dignity from someone who's lived their life giving it to others. The silence was profound. The kind of silence that humbles you. Then slowly, the diner erupted into applause. Not polite claps, thunderous applause, loud and unrestrained. People rose from their seats, clapping, whistling, tears streaking their faces. The sound filled every inch of the small space, rattled the coffee cups, shook the walls. Evelyn bowed her head slightly, her hand covering her eyes for just a moment. For years, she had carried her story quietly, never asking for recognition. And yet, in this moment, it found her anyway. When the noise finally began to fade, the scarred angel stepped forward again. "Ma'am," she said, her voice rough, "I never served. But today, I think I finally understand what service means." Evelyn met her gaze. Service means you put others before yourself. That's all it ever was. The medals, the ranks, those are just symbols. The real fight? It's here. In how you treat people. Every day. Her daughter reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "And that's why you're the toughest person I know." For the first time that morning, Evelyn let her guard slip. Her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes softened. "You want to know a secret?" she said, looking at her daughter, then at the room around her. "Strength doesn't come from being fearless. I was scared every single day I was overseas. I was scared this morning when that man hit me. But strength is doing what's right anyway. That's all it is." The words hung heavy, filling the room with something more powerful than fear, more lasting than applause. It was truth. And truth, once spoken, could not be taken back. Outside, the angels revved their engines once, as if punctuating the moment. Inside, every soul present knew they had witnessed something they would carry for the rest of their lives. This wasn't just the story of an old woman in a diner. This was a revelation. Evelyn Harris was no ordinary grandmother. She was a warrior, a teacher, and a living reminder that dignity is not given. It is owned, protected, and shared. And though she would walk out of that diner as humbly as she had walked in, everyone who saw her that day would never forget her name. The next morning, the diner smelled of fresh coffee and hope instead of fear. The sun poured through the windows, glinting off the open sign that had been replaced overnight. The cracked window was gone, the broken booth repaired, and the community had shown up in force, bringing paint, lumber, money, and love. What once was a scene of violence was now a scene of rebirth. Evelyn sat at her favorite corner booth, Kane leaning against the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. Her cheeks still held the faint mark from where the thug had slapped her, but she wore it like a medal, a reminder that even in her old age, her dignity was untouchable. Across from her sat Rosa, exhausted but glowing. She had barely slept, still riding the adrenaline of the night before. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, journalists requesting interviews, veterans groups offering support, biker chapters across the country sending solidarity. But for now, she ignored all of it, choosing to sit in quiet peace with her mother. The door jingled, and in came Marcus, the teenage waiter who had first frozen in fear during the attack. He walked straight to Evelyn, no hesitation this time, and placed a bouquet of fresh daisies in front of her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, "I should have done more. I froze. But I promise you, I won't ever freeze again. You taught me that." Evelyn looked at him, her stern veteran's eyes softening. She placed a hand on his trembling one. "Son," she said firmly, "courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about what you do after. And you're here. That's what matters." The diner filled with murmurs of agreement as townsfolk nodded. For many, Evelyn had become more than a neighbor. She was now a symbol. Suddenly, the roar of engines returned, deep, thunderous, unapologetic. The ground outside trembled as the Hells Angels pulled up once more, their jackets gleaming under the morning sun. People stepped outside to watch as Rosa approached them. The leader, a tall man with a long gray beard, dismounted his bike and extended his hand to Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "we ride for justice, but last night we rode for you. You reminded us what honor looks like. You're family now." Evelyn chuckled, the sound warm and sharp at once. "I already got one army. Looks like I got another now." The crowd erupted in cheers. News spread fast. By evening, the diner was trending across the nation. 81-year-old black veteran stands tall after attack, community, Hells Angels rally behind her. The story wasn't about violence anymore. It was about resilience, unity, and the strange alliances that form when dignity is defended. Weeks later, the diner had more business than it had ever seen. Tourists came by just to sit at Evelyn's booth. Marcus worked proudly, never again afraid to step forward. Rosa expanded the diner's hours, turning it into a hub for community meetings, veterans gatherings, and biker charity rides. As for Evelyn, she spent her mornings sipping coffee and her afternoons sharing stories of war, of sacrifice, of life's battles both won and lost. But when asked about the slap, she would only say, "It wasn't about me. It was about respect. And respect, once defended, can change everything." The thug? He was behind bars, facing charges not just for the assault but for other crimes dug up after the incident. He had thought the old woman was powerless. He had thought wrong. One evening, long after the diner had closed, Evelyn stood outside with Rosa, watching the sunset streak the sky in orange and gold. Rosa leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "You know, Mama," Rosa said softly, "you didn't just survive. You started something. People look at you and they see strength they forgot existed." Evelyn smiled, her hand squeezing her daughter's. "I didn't start anything, child. I just reminded them of what was already there. Dignity. Courage. family. That's all. The engines of a dozen bikes roared in the distance, their sound not threatening but reassuring. Rosa looked toward the horizon where the riders disappeared into the fading light, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly safe. And Evelyn? She sat back down at her booth, Kane resting at her side, sipping her coffee like always. The world outside might change, but inside that diner, her legacy was carved into every corner, not of a victim, but of a veteran, a mother, and a fighter whose strength inspired an army. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If this touched your heart, then you're going to love the next one. It's just as powerful, and even more intriguing than you can imagine. So don't stop here. Check out more videos on my channel and continue the journey. I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that story. See you there.